Hey everybody, welcome to the channel and thank you so much for joining me for part one of our visit to Zion National Park. Let's take a moment to view the Towers of the Virgin with the Witch's Head there in the center. Just an incredible sight. Now we'll get right into the park summary as we head along the Riverside Walk, which starts at the Temple of Siniwaba. Zion National Park was formally established by President Woodrow Wilson in 1919. Before then, it was known as Mekuntaweep National Monument. According to the most recent visitor numbers, Zion sees about 4.9 million visitors annually, which ranks second among all of the 63 national parks in the USA, behind the Great Smoky Mountains. While Great Smoky Mountains does have far more visitors, it doesn't actually charge an admission fee, so Zion has the greatest visitation of any park that charges an admission fee. Because of the large crowds here, Zion is a park where if you don't have a plan and stick to a tight schedule, the first time you visit, you might not have that great of an experience. So I very much encourage you to stick around till the end of the video. We'll discuss the park's regions momentarily when we look at the park map. The park protects Zion Canyon, of course, and Kolob Canyon, in addition to a few smaller canyons, which all feature dramatic, towering sandstone cliffs and monoliths. Zion isn't a very big wildlife park. However, there are bighorn sheep here. You may see some deer on the canyon floor. They do have tarantulas here that we'll see in part 2 if that piques your interest. And while quite rare, mountain lions are also present within the park. As for weather, Zion is desert territory, so especially in the summertime here, it can get very hot, so make sure that you hydrate. There isn't so much rain, but you do need to be mindful of snowmelt in the springtime and afternoon thunderstorms in the mid to late summer, as those can produce flash floods. And finally, cell service is spotty within the park, so you want to make sure that you download your maps for when you venture away from the visitor center. Now let's take a quick look at the park map. Here's an overview of the park, which is located in southwestern Utah, about 150 miles northeast of Las Vegas, Nevada. We'll zoom in a little bit. You can see here to the northwest, that's the Kolob Canyon area, which is right off I-15. Note Kolob Arch there. It requires a bit of an involved hike to get out there to it, but Kolob Arch is the second largest freestanding arch in the United States and the 6th largest in the entire world. I haven't been to that section of the park, but hope to visit it in the future. As we zoom in on the main area of the park, you can see the Zion Scenic Drive here. As you get to the northeast part of the canyon, there is the very famous Angel's Landing, which does require a permit to hike, and then you have the Narrows north of Angel's Landing as you hike up the North Fork of the Virgin River. Down here to the southwest, you have the Visitor Center and the Human History Museum. Over to the east, you'll note the Canyon Overlook Trail and the Zion Mount Carmel Highway, which leads to the east entrance of the park. The main thing over there in the east section of the park is the Checkerboard Mesa. As you can see, Zion is not actually that large of a park, and that's why the crowds here are such a big problem, because you have essentially 5 million people every year cram into the main canyon. They do have a shuttle system here, like many busy national parks, and it does work quite well. The shuttles run from the beginning of March through the end of October, and during that time you cannot drive your own vehicle up the Zion Canyon Scenic Drive. You must use the shuttle unless you're staying at the Zion Lodge, which good luck getting reservations for that. I hope you found that information useful. If so, I'd really appreciate it if you would please give me a like, and please consider subscribing if you want to see more videos like this. Thanks so much, and let's continue with the video. We'll continue along the Riverside Walk, which begins at the Temple of Siniwaba, which is the last stop on the Zion Canyon Scenic Drive and leads directly to the Narrows. The Narrows, along with Angel's Landing, are the two signature hikes of this park. We won't be seeing Angel's Landing because that's a hike I'm not going to do. I have a difficult time with heights, and sorry, I just can't do it. Maybe if the channel gets monetized, we'll see. Here's the Virgin River, which there's a great deal of irony in that name of this river, considering how many people trek up the river every year on the Narrows hike. Despite the somewhat timid appearance here, the Virgin River is quite steep as you go up the canyon and is 162 miles long and eventually flows into Lake Mead to the southwest. Regarding Angel's Landing, there's a reservation system with Angel's Landing to limit crowds on that hike, and during busy season it can be hard to get a permit. I met a van life couple on this trip who were not able to secure a permit the entire week they were there. The Narrows, however, does not require a permit and is a hike up the northern section of Zion Canyon, which becomes, as the name describes, extremely narrow as you hike up the North Fork of the Virgin River. It's a pretty incredible hike to do. The thing about the Narrows is you're going to get wet because you're hiking up the river. The canyon is just too narrow. There's many areas where you're going to have to wade through water. If you want to experience some of the canyon without getting your feet wet, you can just hike up the Riverside Walk as we're doing now and turn around when you have to cross the river. As it is my first time in the park, I didn't actually intend to hike up the Narrows. I thought I would hike up to the Riverside Walk and just see how I felt about continuing on. I'll go ahead and give you a couple tips for this hike if you're unfamiliar with it. Outside of the park, there's a company called Zion Outfitters. As we take a look at some of the canyon walls here, you're going to see this funny looking formation here that's known as the nose. Getting back to Zion Outfitters, if you like, you can rent waterproof socks, waterproof hiking boots, and a hiking stick. The cost was $40 when I was there. I'm going to go ahead and suggest with this hike, if you decide you do want to get across the river, just go ahead and get some of those fly fishing waders for not much more than what you would spend at Zion Outfitters. You can get some waders off Amazon and those will keep you completely dry. Now we're at the end of the Riverside Walk and I had to make a decision on if I wanted to get my feet wet or not. Thinking it over, I had none of the equipment, didn't have a dry bag for any of my camera gear or phone, no waterproof hiking shoes, and no hiking stick. But hey, it's YouTube, you know what? Let's go ahead and let's do it anyway. So up the Narrows we go. Here's a cool little waterfall. The Virgin River cuts deeper into the canyon than its tributaries, which actually creates waterfalls like this one. Pretty cool. I do not understand the appeal of this hike. Been on it for about an hour, and the canyon is nice, but I don't know if it's that nice to fall this up into all this water. As I mentioned, you want to go ahead and get those fly fishing waders if you can. In addition, you want to get a dry bag for any electronics or anything else you may need to take with you on the hike, whether it's maybe a lunch you pack or medication. Of course, I did not do so with my cell phone and all of my camera gear, so I was really playing with fire, or I guess water, so to speak. You definitely don't want to take a spill here because the water isn't exactly clean. Along the riverbed, there are toxic algae mats. Even if you filter the water, you're not supposed to drink it, and you never want to have your head submerged. In my case, I guess I have some allergy issues, and that didn't really vibe with those algae mats, and I actually got sick on this hike. My sinuses started blowing up. So if you have sinus problems, I would suggest maybe bringing some saline solutions so you can flush your sinuses out after this hike. The Narrows can be hiked from the top down or from the bottom of the canyon like I'm doing here. From the end of the Riverside Walk, it's about 4.3 miles to Big Springs, where you must turn around and hike back. So 8.6 miles in total, in addition to the Riverside Walk. I'm not going to hike all the way to the end. I estimate that I hiked about 2 miles up the river. I got pretty close to Ordville Canyon, or maybe a little bit past it. I almost took a spill, and since I hadn't even planned to hike up this river, I decided to turn back while I was still ahead, and maybe return another time better prepared. As for hiking the Narrows from the top down, that's a much longer hike that could involve an overnight stay, which in that case you would need a permit for, and starts well up the North Fork of the Virgin River at the Chamberlain Ranch. And the top down hike is a little bit more strenuous and is 16 miles total. I personally would have a preference for the shorter way. Whichever way you decide to go, you do need to be aware of the weather conditions. If you don't have time to stop at the visitor center, make sure that you check out the website or check the weather, because there can be flash flooding in the river, and it doesn't necessarily have to rain in the park boundaries to create a problem. It can rain upstream and then the water flows downstream. People have drowned in this river during flash floods. So make sure that you're aware of the conditions. Typically the Park Service will be pretty good about closing the hike if there's any risk of flash flooding, but with any hike you need to take ownership of your own safety. So now we'll get turned around, and as with a lot of hikes, as you hike back, you can sometimes get a different vantage point and take in some even more incredible scenery on the way back. Maybe it's just the green trees that are perched along the red sandstone walls here that makes the scenery so striking, but for some reason I got a Shangri-La vibe along this hike. One last thing, if for whatever reason you do a foolish thing like I did and hike up the river with just your regular hiking footwear, in addition to getting your feet completely wet, you're going to get a whole lot of sand in your shoes, and so you're probably going to have to throw those socks away. Now that we've finished up the Narrows hike, we're going to head over to the Human History Museum and take in some more views of the canyon. Here are the Towers of the Virgin that we saw at the beginning of the video. From right to left as we pan over, you have the Altar of Sacrifice, Rotten Tooth, Broken Tooth, the Witch Head, and the Sundial. And then to the far left is the West Temple. And this is just an amazing collection of sandstone monoliths. It kind of looks like the Witch's Head is spreading its wings over the valley. It's a very striking park icon, in my opinion. As we take a closer look at some of the features of the Central Canyon here, we'll get to the park recommendation and top tips. Zion is definitely a destination park, but I kind of think that depends on when you visit. I would do everything I could to avoid visiting here during the busy season if at all possible, because in my opinion, I don't think dealing with the crowds here during the summertime are really worth the visit. The crowds here can approach Disney World kind of levels, and I think it really hurts your experience within the park. You saw how many people were there on the Narrows hike, and I really try hard to keep people out of my shots. There were actually thousands of people on the Narrows hike that day, and the lines to board the shuttles were actually pretty long. So during the busy season, I think you really have to combine visiting Zion on a larger trip, such as seeing all of the Mighty Five national parks in Utah, or visit Las Vegas, or do something else, because I really don't think, unless you're going to stay here for a week, you can really see everything you want to see in the park just because the crowds are going to slow you down so much. However, if you come here during the off season when the park is empty, that's where this park really shines. I would say if you take the crowds away, Zion would actually rank as the 7th best park in my opinion, and I would drop Rocky Mountain out of the top 10 in that case. The hiking here is just incredible, and Zion is definitely up there with Yosemite and glaciers in terms of the sense of adventure you get when hiking on the trails. The canyon is also incredibly beautiful. Still, the reality is that 8 months out of the year, this park is horribly crowded. And so taking that into consideration, I don't think Zion can be in my personal top 10, but it's definitely one of the better parks you can visit, no question. The crowds here are by far the worst of any national park by a significant margin. And so that's just going to hurt my personal rating of the park, and try to do everything you can to avoid the crowds here. Getting to the top tips, unfortunately about 60 people have perished within this park over the last 20 or so years. There's an element of danger with both Angel's Landing and the Narrows. Maybe that's part of the appeal of those hikes. The arch there on Bridge Mountain is the Crawford Arch, but you want to make sure you check the current conditions before venturing out into the park each day. As I've harped on quite a bit, the crowds, especially during the summertime, really hamper the experience here. For the best experience on the hikes during the busy season, you really have to start those hikes first thing in the morning. Otherwise, there will be thousands of people on the trail with you. Visiting the Kolob Canyon section can offer a break from the crowds, as that section of the park sees far fewer visitors. As for parking, if you're visiting during the busy season and you don't want to have to pay for parking in Springdale, which costs between $15 or $25 for the day, you must have your cars parked in the visitor center by 8 a.m. and that's where your car is going to stay for the entire day. If you move, you're not going to get another parking spot within a national park. During a warmer year, I think visiting in early November would give you the best experience visiting Zion. The water of the Virgin River shouldn't be too cold then, and the crowds would have wound down, and that's after the shuttle stops running for the park, so you'd be able to use your own car to drive up the scenic drive. During the busy season between March and October, you're only going to want to visit midweek on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. Don't visit this park on any holidays, weekends, or during short weeks if you can. The park is going to be absolutely swamped. To fully see the park, I think you need a minimum of 3 days. But again, if it's busier, you're going to need more time because, again, the crowds are just going to slow you down. As for the best places to see sunrise or sunset, you're going to want a vantage point of the Watchman for sunset. That can either be viewed from the visitor center, which is pretty easy. We're seeing the Watchman here at sunset, or from Angel's Landing if you're adventurous. For sunrise, you want to be at the end of the Canyon Overlook Trail, which starts just outside of the east entrance of the Zion Tunnel. You could also maybe do Observation Point, which is on the opposite side of the canyon from Angel's Landing. Finally, for boondocking, Zion is actually one of the better parks for boondocking. About 10-12 miles away in the town of Virgin, if you go up Kolob Terrace Road, there's kind of a dirt bike area, and there's a lot of boondocking around there. And then a little bit farther away in St. George, you can stealth camp in a couple areas in that town. So you're willing to drive a little bit, but the boondocking is pretty available outside of the park, and that's really helpful because getting reservations for campsites and at the lodge is quite difficult. As we see the sunset light up the Watchman here, I want to thank you so much for joining me for this video, and I hope to see you back for part 2, where we will explore some more of the park, including seeing some wildlife. I want to thank you so much for joining me, and I will catch you in the next video. Thanks and take care. Bye.